to election night 2020. I'm Chris Castile with the Oklahoman and Oklahoman.com. I'm here with my colleagues Carmen Foreman and Dale Denwald for our first election update of the night, the 8 p.m. update. We've got 3 more coming after this where we'll know a lot more. But thanks for joining us. We do have some races called already. Some could probably go down to the wire, the ones that we're watching, things like the Congressional District that we're sitting in right now, District 5, State Question 805 on criminal justice reform. But Dale, one of the races you were watching was called immediately after the polls closed an hour ago, and that was U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe, Republican, against lawyer, former TV journalist Abby Broyles.
Yeah, that's right. In that race, we only have about 30% of the precinct reporting. However, the AP, the Associated Press, did call this race almost immediately after the polls closed, based on their however they formulate the projected winners for each race. Right now, with 31% of precincts reporting, we have Jim Inhofe sitting at about 57%. And Abby Broyles at 39%. I was looking at Jim Inhofe's previous electoral results over the years for his U.S. Senate races, and no Democrat has ever gotten more than 40% against him since he was first elected to the Senate in 1994.
And that was former Congressman Dave McCurdy, and that was a really tough race. And a harbinger, one of those races that showed what was going to happen that year. It was a huge Republican landslide. Republicans took over the House for the first time since the 1950s. Republicans took over the Senate. It was Bill Clinton's midterms. It was a massacre for Democrats that night, and Inhofe's been in the Senate ever since. He's 85 years old. He turns 86 in 2 weeks. And basically, I had him in a couple weeks ago in the studio and talked to him, and he did not even commit to finishing this term. He has 4 years left as chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. They're term limited there. And so, if Republicans hang on to the U.S. Senate and he's able to serve those 4 years, you might see another U.S. Senate race for Inhofe's seat.
It'll certainly be a scramble, won't it, guys? Who's the Republican? Who's the Republican going to step up? How many Republicans are we going to see in that primary race?
Hoffmeister,
I don't know if Stitt
Congressional folks. Well, I'm just possibilities.
Just throwing them out there. Yeah.
Mark Wayne Mullen. Yeah, maybe Kevin Hearn.
And it'll be a scramble on the Democratic side too. We've got certainly don't have as many.
I think Edmondson's done.
We don't have as many Democrats sort of in the pipeline as maybe there were 10 years ago.
They don't have much of a bench at all.
Right.
Yeah, and they're not going to be, you think about some of these registration figures we've seen in the last few days. They've got a lot of work to do. Yeah, Carmen, what about those figures? And we'll get to some races in just a minute. We don't have a lot of completed races, but these registration figures, as they're reported, the very first time Republicans actually had a majority, they've had a plurality for quite a while.
Yeah, and I mean the state GOP, they'll tell you that they made a concerted effort, as is done in election years, to register a lot more voters. And I think they kept that effort up better after COVID-19, after the pandemic hit, than say the Democrats did. Mm-hmm. I think Democrats have been, more likely to stay at home or do things through electronic means, and it's just maybe didn't have as much of an effect. But anyways, now Republicans make up more than 50% of the voters in this state, which I was honestly surprised that hadn't already happened.
Probably a lot of people thought that as well, but there really are a lot of independents in this state, a lot of registered independents. And that's why it doesn't break that way with the 50-something, 40-something Democrats, because there's so many independents. That's really been a trend here. Not third party, not libertarian, but people who don't register with any party. Yeah. And that registration in this state's history is why they called Trump immediately as the victor here, immediately after the polls closed. No Democratic presidential candidate has won Oklahoma since Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964. No one's even won a county since Al Gore in 2000, so none of us there was no suspense there. Carmen, you're following State Question 814.
Yes.
It doesn't look good in early
It's
returns.
not looking great. I honestly can't say I'm surprised by that. State Question 814 is the one that would redirect some funding from TSET and give the legislature more control in how to spend that funding. They say that they would use that additional money to help pay for the state's 10% share of Medicaid expansion, with obviously the federal government covering the other 90%. But I think there's a lot of factors at play here. One, a lot of people didn't understand this.
Yeah.
Two, there's nobody really getting out there and explaining to people, why they should be voting for this. The governor and a lot of Republican lawmakers have been for it. But the governor has really directed more of his attention on State Question 805, trying to get people to vote against that. And so, State Question 814 just kind of fell to the wayside. It's also confusing, and I think history has shown that when people don't understand a state question, they're more likely to vote against it than vote for it.
And you had some people come out, like we had a column, I think in the last couple of days by Drew Edmondson, who was the Attorney General when TSET was set up. He was the Attorney General when this nationwide settlement with tobacco companies was reached. And all this money from the tobacco companies was committed to health care and getting people to stop smoking, but also to just kind of they call it a trust, right? So they set up a trust to have the money. People don't have any complaints with the way that this is, so
No.
It's like
They're not hearing.
that was a tough hill to,
And that was only 20 years ago that voters approved creating TSET.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that there are Oklahomans who remember voting for that and are now like, well, I thought that was working just fine.
Yeah.
I haven't, seen any headlines of corruption at TSET or,
Right,
whatever.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
Well, is there a big?
It's doing exactly what it was set up to do. Why would you get in there and let the legislature mess with it?
Yeah, is there going to be a big question now for legislators to answer when they go back into session?
Yeah, the question was still going to be there, how to fund Medicaid expansion, because the TSET question, State Question 814, was only at best going to cover maybe 1/3 of the cost of Medicaid expansion. So they were going to have to find money from other sources. But I don't expect the legislature to raise taxes, but essentially what they're trying to do is fund this without having to raise taxes. So that could be, it's going to be a hard budget year. Finding that money is going to be tough.
I saw Senator Greg McCourtney talking on Twitter about, basically throwing the idea away of raising taxes and say, well, where do we get this money? What do we cut from? So I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
So we've got 5 U.S. House seats in Oklahoma. 4 of them are not contested. They're contested. They're not. There's no suspense involved at all. Dale, what are you seeing in congressional districts 1 through 4?
Right. So I'm seeing in District 1, which is Tulsa, Kevin Hearn
Incumbent,
is
Republican
the incumbent.
incumbent. I should say that these 4 are all Republicans.
That's right. Kevin Hearn is leading Kojo, and forgive me if I say this name wrong. Kojo Asamoah Cesar is leading 51 to about 40, 45. It's probably a safe Republican seat. We only have about 13% of the results in. I don't know.
Tulsa is a
where
very
exactly,
safe Republican area.
Yeah,
so,
and I don't know where
that's
exactly
the Tulsa
these precincts
seat.
are.
Yeah, it's mainly Tulsa.
Typically, you would expect a Republican to carry that seat. Also happens to be Jim Inhofe's former seat.
Yep. Some form of it anyway.
It was,
Probably didn't.
Changed over the
there
years.
has
It
been
didn't
some
look that way,
redistricting.
but the last one Democrat who represented the 1st district was in 1986, a guy named Jim Jones, and then Inhofe won it that year, I think. Yeah.
In District 2, which is eastern Oklahoma, back from where I'm from.
Green country.
That's right, green country. Mark Wayne Mullen, the incumbent Republican, has 72%. He's very, very close to President Trump, and we'll see if Trump loses tonight, we'll see how vocal he's going to be against the Biden administration. That could be fun to watch.
That'll be all those guys have to do is talk, I think.
Well, they're already in the
They're all
minority
in the
House.
minority. Yeah, so
And that's unlikely to change.
Yeah, that is not going to change, I don't think.
Frank Lucas looks like he's cruising to re-election with 76% of the vote. More than half of the precincts, oddly enough, in District 3, which is pretty much south and a little bit west of Oklahoma City. It looks like over half of the precincts are in for that particular race. It's good to see a lot of returns coming in District 4, which is western Oklahoma. I said that wrong. District 3 is western Oklahoma with Frank Lucas.
It's like a whole western half of Oklahoma. I was going to interject. And
in District 4, Tom Cole, that's going to be Cleveland County, Norman, and parts south and west.
It goes all the way to Ada and then down to Lawton. It's a pretty big district, too. Ardmore, includes Ardmore.
As expected, Tom Cole seems to be retaining his seat. Half the precincts are in, and he's leading with over 62% of the vote.
He's very popular in that district, as is Lucas and obviously Mullen in their district. So the one race that has some suspense to it is the 5th District. Most of Oklahoma County, Pottawatomie and Seminole counties, incumbent Democrat Kendra Horn against State Senator Stephanie Bice, a Republican. Right now, Horn has got little over 58% of the vote, but again, we don't know. You know, a lot of that was early vote.
So much to be counted.
So much to be counted. And what I remember from last time, from the runoff when Bice beat Terry Neese for the nomination, is that some of the North Oklahoma City precincts where Bice's Senate district came in late, and she made kind of a late surge and beat Neese, who had beaten her, was leading her in the rural areas. And that was, I think that was true tonight. I mean, Horn is not going to do as well, very well probably, in Pottawatomie and Seminole County parts of the district. Oklahoma County is how she won this in a huge upset in 2018 by winning Oklahoma County. So that's where she's got to be strong. And there was a lot of early vote in Oklahoma County by absentee mail and absentee in person. And Kendra Horn got a good lead. I think she got like 60% of that. Or
now, Chris, has the national campaign committees stayed into this race until today?
And then and more.
So much.
So the national campaign committees are the DCCC and the NRC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They've been in it for months, pouring millions into it, and then there are groups aligned with Republicans and Democrats, the House Majority Fund, the House Leadership Fund, those kind of things that have put millions into it too. This race, counting the candidates, will probably reach $20 million.
I've gotten a lot of that in my mailbox. And I've seen a lot of it on my TV.
Yeah.
It's just nonstop.
I watch a lot of YouTube, and before every video, there's something about either Kendra Horn or Stephanie Bice. I'm glad today's over.
Yeah.
Well, they've been in it, like at least one or two of them have been in it actually since late last year in terms of TV. When the impeachment was coming up, I mean, there was one of those Republican-aligned groups was running ads. I think they wound up spending $500,000-$600,000 on ads against Kendra Horn about impeachment. She voted for both articles of impeachment against Trump in December. That never came up in this general election race.
Surprising.
Not one time. Trump has not been an issue in this race at all.
Certainly was in the primary.
Certainly was a nonstop. I stand with Trump, and then
I'm
Bice
closer to Trump.
No, I'm closer.
He likes me better.
and that was it. That really was the nature of that primary. And then they just,
Well, and I don't think we've seen very much of it in the Senate race either. With Ira Burrell, she's been mostly running against Jim Inhofe. And I don't know that I've ever heard her mention the president.
No, and it wouldn't be wise for her to. And
Not when he's so well liked.
Yeah, I mean,
president.
He's probably on his way to getting more than 60% of the vote statewide, and she's running a statewide race. But this district includes Oklahoma County, where Trump really didn't do that well in 2016, and it just wasn't really a good strategy. Quite obviously, they decided in the Bice campaign it wasn't a good strategy. So
I will be curious to see if Jim Inhofe's age, if you could tell anything from the election results, if fewer fewer Republicans turned out for Jim Inhofe because he's 85 years old now. And if they just, it's hard. I guess he's the Republican candidate. You vote for him, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit perplexed by the Abby Roll's focus on. I don't know if she's explicitly mentioned how old he is or talked about it, but she's talked a lot about retire Inhofe, which you can't hear that and not think about the guy's 85 years old.
It's a fine line you got to walk there to say, he's been there long enough, without saying he's too old for the job, because some of the ads that they ran, of him speaking, where he was kind of having a hard time articulating a point, clearly where I thought were meant to suggest senility or something. And I don't know how well that's going to go over, really. I mean, that's a dicey path right there.
Well, and Inhofe's not that great at public speaking. Anytime if you listen to him on the floor, it's he's not a great orator. He gets his point across, or tries to at least, but he's not William Jennings Bryan or anything up there. So it's probably not fair to pick that out and say, look at this guy.
Yeah, it's tough. It's kind of, you don't want to look like you're making fun of an older person or something. It's a.
But that did seem to be a main part of her campaign. I mean, and she's what, 30, 31?
31, I think, yeah.
And you didn't see Inhofe running ads that Abby Broyles is too young to serve in the U.S. Senate.
I don't think
his ads were that she was too left.
Yeah.
I don't think it hurt her campaign, her saying that, but I certainly don't think it helped.
Yeah.
It's probably an issues campaign, but in reality, Oklahoma is so Republican and Jim Inhofe is so well liked. It'll be really hard for anybody to beat him.
They tried that, and I don't remember exactly how explicit it was, but I think it was actually even more explicit among Democrats in California in 2018 with Senator Dianne Feinstein, who I believe is about Inhofe's age. Yeah. And they basically were saying that Feinstein's too old and it's time for somebody new, So it didn't work in California. And one of the reasons is because
in Oklahoma, we don't like to be like California.
No, we don't. Is because they have this base of support, all these people that they've helped through all these years. I mean, I think Dianne Feinstein's been in the Senate since 94, 96, somewhere in there, and she has just all kinds of constituencies that through her staff, through all of her Senate work, are loyal to her. So, and I think Inhofe has the exact same situation. I mean, not to mention this is a red state. He's a Republican. Abby Broyles has never held political office. She's a political newcomer trying to knock off somebody who's known in every town, So, and with that, we are going to end the first of our updates, and look forward to seeing you at 9 o'clock when we should have more results on the few races where there's some suspense left. And thank you for joining us. Hi, welcome back to Election Night 2020. I'm Chris Castile at the Oklahoman, theoklahoman.com with my colleague Kayla Branch. We are going to talk a little bit of state and county race right now on this update. Kayla's been covering historic sheriff's race in Oklahoma County, but she's also been, our reporter has been all over State Question 805, which is the question that, about whether Oklahoma takes the next step in criminal justice reform. It's been highly controversial. You've probably seen the ads. Kayla, how's it doing? It's not looking too good for 805 tonight.
It is not looking good, and it hasn't been looking good all night. The latest report that I got from the state election board was about over 80% of precincts reporting statewide, and there were about 60% of voters who had opposed the measure, and that's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of votes against State Question 805, dividing the yes and no. So I don't see it passing tonight. I'm not sure if AP is going to call it yet, but it is not looking good.
It's going down. And you had a story this weekend. The Yes on 805 campaign filed its first campaign finance report where they named where all the money was coming from, their donors, and it's millions of dollars. And it was primarily who?
The ACLU, based out of New York, and then a group called FWD.US, so Forward US, which has its focus on immigration and criminal justice reform nationally. And we're just talking about that being funded by Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook. So a lot of national, out-of-state money coming in. I think it was over $6 million from the last year. And like you mentioned, State Question 805, the Yes campaign, they spent millions of dollars on TV commercials, on mailers, on different town halls, and they've really tried to, they've said, educate voters and drum up support, but it did not work.
And we have some familiar figures behind 805 that are really have become very involved in criminal justice in the last few years. Chris Steele, the former House Speaker, Sue Ann Arnell, the foundation, the philanthropist here. But there were some big names on the other side. I mean, Governor Stitt, Attorney General Mike Hunter, former
Keating.
Governor Frank Keating. There were a lot of voices on the other side of 805. And what were they? What concerns were they expressing about it?
So the main concern that they expressed, and that I heard just from regular folks too, was the way that the state question classified nonviolent crimes. So it's pretty technical, but essentially there were crimes that people felt should be violent and should be eligible for sentence enhancements, including domestic violence, animal cruelty, some child trafficking laws, some home burglary charges, that if State Question 805 passed, they would no longer be eligible to have their sentences enhanced. So if you were a repeat offender, currently a prosecutor or a judge can say, oh, you've done this 4 or 5 times, so we're going to go beyond the maximum time allowed in state law to send you to prison, and we're going to double it.
And that's called an enhanced sentence.
An enhanced sentence, exactly. So for certain crimes, that would end with State Question 805, and people were not happy with that list of crimes. So that was really the main one, but also it's a state question that would be a constitutional amendment, and so it would be really hard to change in the future, and that was mentioned as well.
Right. Now, I don't know if I don't remember, was the big state question on criminal justice reform passed 4 years ago called 780, was that constitutional or not?
I believe that it was.
Okay.
And state lawmakers have found that was a state question that changed drug offenses and possession of drug offenses.
So they weren't felonies anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
And state lawmakers since then have tried to kind of tinker with that. There was some talk.
They made it retroactive, right?
Yes. And there was some talk at the state capitol this year about, do we change state law on how close you can be to a school or different things where it kind of would have changed the impact of those state questions. So lawmakers can still find their way around constitutional amendments. It just is more difficult.
So we know this. We know Oklahoma is a very high incarceration state. At times it's been number one in its incarceration rate. It's still number one for women, I believe. Voters and lawmakers, policymakers have taken steps to reduce that, but 805 doesn't look like it's going to be the next step, and they're going to have to look another direction, I guess.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
find. So
They'll have to find something else. Not sure what it'll be. I've asked the opposition campaign, if not 805, then what? And they haven't really said
Yeah.
what next. So it'll be interesting to follow up as this continues, like you said, to be a top issue in the state.
Sure. Speaking of criminal justice, you're following the sheriff's race. Historic race because both candidates are African American. Tommy Johnson III, the Republican who knocked off incumbent P.D. Taylor in the primary, and Waylon Cubitt, the Democrat. How does that race look right now?
So that race is pretty tight right now. And last time I checked, there were 45% of Oklahoma County precincts reporting Democrat Waylon Cubitt is up at 52% of votes, and Tommy Johnson is at 47%. So it's a tight race. It's been pretty tight all night, though early voting did have Cubitt up pretty far ahead. I think he was at 59% and Johnson was at 40%. And I think this is kind of to be expected. There wasn't ever, a real clear person that I thought was going to come out on top. They're both new, and they have done some pretty extensive campaigning over the last several weeks. So
it'll be interesting, and to talk about Oklahoma County, that's one of the races, few races with suspense here right now, and that's the 5th District Congressional race, which includes most of Oklahoma County, not all of it, and we're watching that carefully. And as Kayla just mentioned, in the sheriff's race, the early vote in Oklahoma County came in heavily for Democratic U.S. Rep. Kendra Horn. That is narrowed considerably as a lot of the precincts have been counted. It's narrowing still as the areas in North Oklahoma County, like Edmond and North Oklahoma City, the more conservative parts of the county are being counted. So that race could come down to the wire, watching that carefully. So other big ones were called early. President Trump, of course, wins the red state of Oklahoma. And U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe won another term. And we will talk to you again. We probably know a lot more an hour from now. So hope to see you again at our 10 o'clock update. Thanks. Hi, I'm Chris Castile with the Oklahoman, oklahoman.com. Thanks so much for joining us for our 10 o'clock update, where there's still some suspense left in a couple of races, including the 5th District Congressional race. Just right when we were about to come on, Republican State Senator Stephanie Bice took a narrow lead, less than 1,000 votes over Democratic U.S. Rep. Kinder Horn, with about 84% of the vote. And it looks like, in looking at the map, that a lot of those North Oklahoma County precincts are out that are red, and some of them are even part of Bice's Senate district. So that one, it looks like it's going to come down to the wire. It does kind of look like Bice may have an advantage right now, but who knows? It is definitely going to be a close race. Also, if there is suspense about this, Vice President Joe Biden is still leading slightly in Oklahoma County. So we're trying to figure out, Carmen, whether he's going to whether a Democratic presidential candidate is going to win a county in Oklahoma this year for the first time since 2000. I'm here with my colleague Carmen Foreman, who's covering a bunch of different stuff tonight, including some legislative races. And there's kind of an interesting angle with the rural-urban thing that's happened with the House tonight, Carmen.
Yeah, it's not unusual for Republicans to continue to gain seats in Oklahoma's legislature. But what we saw tonight is that in Oklahoma's House, there were a few remaining rural districts that were held by Democrats. And it seems those 3 districts have now fallen into Republican control. One, no Democrat ran for the seat. And then one out in Chickasha,
right.
Representative David Perryman is retiring, and the Republican Dick Lowe won in that election. And then out in Tahlequah, Democrat Matt Meredith was running for re-election, and he lost to his Republican opponent. His name is Bob Ed Culver.
Wow, so
3 seats.
Democrats don't have a single rural district left in the House.
No, some people consider Representative Trish Ranson represents basically Stillwater.
Mm-hmm.
Some people consider that a rural district. I don't really, because it's really like the OSU
It's not
campus.
traditionally rural, that's for sure.
Yes.
It's not. I mean, if you're talking about Payne County, maybe outside of Stillwater, maybe you could say it's rural, but
Yeah.
not if she's got part of the campus. That's not rural. So.
Right. And like Democrats were looking at a couple seats in Lawton in the House that maybe they were hoping they could pick up. I think they were really hopeful that, that map we saw for how Medicaid expansion passed this summer, the Lawton area voted for Medicaid expansion, and they were hoping that would carry over. Unfortunately, did not for them. So the Republicans in those areas kept their seats and were not defeated by Democrats.
People in Oklahoma have just kind of gotten used to this, this shift. It's a red state, blah, blah, blah. And they just assume everybody's a Republican. But it is still a huge story what's happened just in the last, 10 to 15 years.
Yeah,
and,
it's not that long. I mean, we were talking about this.
It has not been that long.
Yeah.
And now for the idea that the party that once controlled like all of rural eastern Oklahoma, not western, that was Republican even back, when most of the state was Democratic, but all of that eastern Oklahoma area, Grady County, county like where Chickasha is, and Stevens County, I mean, those were Democratic areas,
And now it's just flipped on its
It is
head.
just totally flipped, and we're all now, back then, a lot of the urban seats were Republicans, and now that's trending blue. So it has just been a total reversal. We're seeing that, obviously in the Trump race, where the only counties where Biden runs close are in urban ones, and he's just, Biden just gets blown out in
Rural
Oklahoma,
areas.
which is, that's not new. But just to have this last 2 or 3 seats fallen, I mean, how did the Democrats stay relevant at all? I mean, with so few people.
It's hard. Right now, they can overturn a gubernatorial veto without any Democratic votes. That takes 2/3 of both chambers. Republicans will now have at least 80 seats in the House.
And 101 member House.
So they will have, 3/4 of the chamber as well. So Democrats have their voice, but really, not a lot of their bills get heard. But they work sort of behind the scenes to kind of do that bipartisanship, kind of try and get some of the, less liberal legislation heard, the more bipartisan stuff, things like that. But
Right. But they just don't have the numbers to really have any influence,
Yes.
to have any leverage whatsoever on anything. They're really
the
just
budget, they're.
just
What I'm totally early on this, but I think next year's redistricting process will be absolutely fascinating because we see the trend across the country is that rural areas are losing population and urban areas are gaining population. So in theory, that would lead us to believe that urban areas, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, the suburbs, could gain more seats in this redistricting, and
Right.
that could be beneficial to Democrats.
depends on how they draw the lines. And there's a Republican governor, of course. So again, Democrats. This was a key election for them because of redistricting. And now they find themselves with an even weaker voice.
But they were never going to take control of the chamber
Right,
again.
right.
It could be many decades before that happens.
Yeah.
But the Senate's interesting too. There were a couple of close races where Democrats may have picked up, and one is still looking close. Senate District 35, which was an open seat in Tulsa. Democrat Joanna Dossett and Republican Cheryl Baber. Last time I checked, they were neck and neck. But Democrats already lost a seat in the Senate. Senator Allison Ikley Freeman. This was following her first term. She was running for re-election, very close, very contested election, and then she got into a car wreck earlier this year.
I remember that. Yeah, missed a lot of the stuff.
And she has been doing a lot of rehab, and I think that may have made it harder for her to campaign as
No
much.
doubt, yeah.
So
Well, so the Democrats are in single digits in the 48-person Senate, right?
they have 9 right now,
Yeah.
so they'll lose Senator Ikley Freeman, but they may gain a second Senator Dossett. There's already Senator J.J. Dossett, who is Joanna Dossett's brother. So, but it's unlikely.
And they're going to stay in single digits probably.
Very
And
likely.
I should just ask you covered the Senate Majority, Senate President Pro Tem Greg Treat was up this time, and he's coasting, I assume.
Yeah, he's on track to win. No surprise there.
Yeah.
He had a lot of money and a Republican-friendly district.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Probably a lot of friends.
yes.
Let me ask you real quick before we go. Both state questions have been called.
Correct. They both failed. And I think the most interesting thing is that, okay, so state question 814 didn't really have a strong campaign for it, didn't have a strong campaign against it, and then we had, that lost by almost the same margin as state question 805.
Yeah, wow.
With the Yes on 805 campaign spent millions.
Right.
And then the opposition campaign ramped up in about the past month, and they spent less than 8 million that the Yes campaign spent. But it's fascinating that they lost by roughly the same margins, totally different issues, a lot more spending in one race.
And I wonder, Carmen, I think as you mentioned before, and I think you're absolutely right. 814 was so confusing.
Very.
805, I think people kind of understood it by the end of it. I think they understood it at some level, and
Yes.
and that they were. So 814 probably got a lot of opposition just because people are like, what? But 805, they're like, I'm against this.
Yes.
I don't like this idea. And then you had, some of the big Republican names, and
Governor Stitt was fighting against it pretty strong.
and I noticed last week in a forum on local television here with the 2 sheriff candidates, they both came out
Both of
against
them,
it.
yeah.
So-
Even the Democrat, which
Right.
is surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that opposition was a little more thought through. I think
Agreed.
people kind of said, I'm not on board with this right now with the way.
Meanwhile, maybe they read 814 and they were like, well, I'm not on board with this because I don't understand it.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, I think.
Well, thanks so much, Carmen. I appreciate it, and thanks for watching. And we will be back for one more update in an hour at 11 o'clock.
Hi, and welcome to the Oklahoma studios for our latest live election report. I'm Don Mecoy. I'm the managing editor here at the Oklahoma, and I'm joined by our political expert, Chris Castile. We've been covering the races tonight, and as you have pointed out for weeks and months, this 5th District congressional race was going to be one of the most highly anticipated, most closely watched, and appeared to be one of the closest races that we were going to be following, and that's turned out to be true.
Yeah, just everything that we thought it would be. So highly competitive, down to the wire. Senator Bice, a Republican in this race, looks to have reclaimed that seat for a Republican. She just gave a victory speech. As we're talking at 11 p.m., the Associated Press hasn't called the race, and so we will not. But it does look I think it was 7 or 8 precincts remaining in Oklahoma County, that it would be really hard for Congresswoman Horn to get the votes she needs. I think it's like 6,000 or 7,000.
Yeah, it was close to 9. Yeah,
close to 9 to get enough votes to pull that out. But it was. I mean, it's just what happened was that when Horn won that seat in a huge upset in 2018. She lost Seminole and Pottawatomie counties, which are Shawnee and Seminole, but she didn't lose them, by nearly as much as she lost them tonight. I mean, I think they both were over 70% Bice, and so she had to get enough in Oklahoma County to overcome those votes, and there's plenty of votes in Oklahoma County to overcome those, and she did that in 2018, but she just didn't. She didn't apparently do that tonight, get enough of a margin in Oklahoma County. Right before we came on, I looked at the Congresswoman was still leading Oklahoma County, but not by enough to make up for those votes. It was very close. Senator Bice has a district in Oklahoma County. I mean, it goes into Canadian County, but she's got a state Senate district. So she has a political base up there. In those northern kind of north and then west counties of Oklahoma, of her Senate district.
Well, I know Senator Bice did very well in her own Senate district, and as I recall, when that Horn did take she had some strength up in the Edmond area and even north of there, and this time she did not, and because she was running against the incumbent state senator there. But
it is different, and I really was expecting the margins to be closer in some of those precincts up there, but she was Bice was winning them by huge amounts up in that area, and that's some of that suburban Oklahoma City, what we would call suburban Oklahoma City, I guess, and I thought that Horn would do really well with women up there, and enough to keep it close in some of those, but it didn't seem to work out that way.
Yeah. Well, now, so if Stephanie Bice is the winner, as she has declared, we now have a 100% Republican congressional delegation.
Again, after 2 years.
Yeah, after 2 years, we're back to 100% Republican, and she'll step into a House of Representatives that appears that it's still going to be controlled by the Democratic Party.
Correct.
And so what does that mean when she gets there?
She kind of disappears for a while. I mean, there's really nobody in the House, in the 435-member House, more kind of invisible, irrelevant than a freshman in the minority. And so, I'm not saying that she might not get onto committee that she wants. I think she's talked about getting on transportation. She might get on that. Tom Cole, Representative Tom Cole, used to be on the committee that helps assign people to other committees. The steering committee steers them to, it's like what house you live in, I guess, if you're in Harry Potter land.
The sorting hat.
The sorting hat.
Yes.
Been too long since I read those. But it's just really hard to make a mark as a freshman in the minority, and so I guess her role will be to vote against all these things that she's talked about, being opposed to. But she will be in every way philosophically a change from Representative Horn, from Congresswoman Horn, that came out clearly through this campaign. I mean, Bice is against healthcare, the healthcare Affordable Health Care Act, and you know, any kind of steps that they might have to take to try to protect it if the Supreme Court knocks it down. I mean,
and even as she was declaring victory, one of the very first things she mentioned was, "I got to get to work to get Nancy Pelosi out of there."
yeah, I'm not really sure how she's going to do that, but
Yeah, I mean,
right.
the campaign's over, and that was a big theme of her campaign.
Oh, it was. I mean,
and she's carrying through. After
that was
she's,
the main theme of her campaign. I
Yeah.
thought was, you know, Kinderhorn's a puppet of Nancy Pelosi, and they're both trying to destroy the Oklahoma oil and gas industry. That's basically their campaign. I didn't really get, you know, an agenda much beyond it. You know, there weren't a lot of things that she said, "I want to go up to Washington and work on." So you're right. You know, she said she wants to work on getting rid of Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah. Well, now, as we were sort of slicing and dicing the county in that race, we were also looking at the presidential race. You wrote a story walking up to the to Election Day, saying, "Can Joe Biden win one county in Oklahoma? And if he can, perhaps it's Oklahoma County."
Yeah, and as we came in here, the president had just taken the lead over. Biden had a lead in Oklahoma County almost all night until some of those precincts we talked about earlier started coming in, and President Trump wound up with, I think when we came in, there was like 400 or 500 vote margin.
Yeah, it's really tight.
And as we're saying, if all those people who voted for Kanye West had voted for Biden might pull out Oklahoma County. But yeah, it looks like Trump's going to win all 77, but it's going to be maybe about the same. He only won Oklahoma County in 2016 with 51% of the vote, which is by far his lowest margin of victory in any county in Oklahoma, and it looks like it could wind up the same. I mean,
Another 77 county sweep.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny, you know, the map looked very similar, the precinct map in the 5th District Congressional race and the presidential
it was
race.
almost
Because you have some precincts in the county that are not part of the 5th District. So
Right.
that kind of made the difference between Horn barely winning the county and Trump barely winning the county was some of the difference there.
I think that there was some feeling that Congresswoman Horn would outperform the president. I mean, outperform Biden in Oklahoma County. You know, maybe by 2 to 4 points, but she did not. You know, she didn't do that much better than the Democratic presidential candidate. So she has to be really disappointed, I think, with how Oklahoma County turned out.
Yeah, I would think so, because that really was kind of what all of her hopes were hinged on.
Yeah, she had no chance to win Seminole and Pottawatomie County. She had to win enough of Oklahoma County to overcome that. So I think she's probably kind of wondering what else she could have done, because they spent a ton of money on both sides in this race. You know, it was like this partisan battle in miniature here in the heart of Oklahoma. You know, both parties, national parties, got so involved in it too. Millions of dollars on both sides from party committees, and then outside groups aligned with the party committees. So it was nonstop on local television, Horn and Bice.
And the mailers too,
and
to,
the mailers,
to the point that I think everybody was just sick of it.
Yeah.
The commercials will stop, the mailings will stop, you know, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, we're pretty sure we know what Oklahoma did in the presidential race, but we don't know what's going to happen in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Michigan,
Right.
and other places.
It may not be tonight, it looks like, huh?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like we're going to know who the next president is until later this week, maybe. We don't really know
when
for sure.
Pennsylvania's totally counted. Yeah, I mean, there are just so many states where it's just a portion of the early ballots have been counted. You know, I mean, here in Oklahoma, we don't have near the volume, but I mean, it was I think over 400,000.
Yeah.
We had them up by 8 o'clock. You know, an hour after the polls closed, we had pretty much all of that early voting counted. But that is not going to happen in some of those other
One
states.
thing we learn every national cycle is we have a really good election system in the state of Oklahoma. We use paper ballots so you can track them. We count them fast. We have results. Here we are at 11 o'clock. We pretty much know what all the local races are. We're going to find out who the president is later this week.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there's still, I think when we came in here, 4 or 5 precincts out in Oklahoma County was only because people were still voting there
Yeah.
hours after the, 7 o'clock. So otherwise, we'd have complete results
Yeah.
by now.
Well, and I think this is probably going to be our final update tonight. So we've got the local races, and you can see all of those at oklahoman.com. As soon as Chris gets back to his desk and the AP calls this 5th District race, we'll pretty much have everything in.
Think so.
And we'll have that all up there on the oklahoman.com tonight. And all of us will wait, the entire country and the entire world will wait to find out who our next president is, perhaps tomorrow or someday later this week or whenever we find out. We'll have to be patient. But so that's all we're going to have tonight from here. It's been a pleasure having you come in here tonight to the studio in downtown Oklahoma City. And we hope you have a great night and a wonderful tomorrow. We'll see you then.